Greetings, this is Greed and welcome back to my channel about creating good game content. Today we're going to be discussing your villain. You know, that other guy that drives the plot forward that's not necessarily the hero. And we're going to be talking about the things, a broad overview, but the things that you should ask yourself when creating a villain. Alright? And while we do that, I'm going to be brushing back up on my minuscule RPG Maker skills because most of my skills suck anyway. Yeah, I think Project 1's a really good title. So, I was going to say while this is loading up, but obviously it's loading really quickly. Alright, so, starting out with your villain, you want to ask a few very important questions, and these questions should sound very familiar. Alright? And those questions are: who is your villain? What does she want? Why can't she get it? What does she do about that? Why doesn't that work? How does it end? Alright, now these should sound really familiar. That's because they're the same 6 questions we asked earlier when we were talking about your game and your hero. Okay? These are all questions that drive you in your answers towards whatever your goal is in creating said character. And so, obviously this is well, that's kind of weird. Obviously the goal here is to spark ideas and creativity. Alright, these are some pretty basic questions. But if you continuously ask them about your overall story and each of your characters that you plan on fleshing out, this should drive you to each of your plot points, as far as the character arc is concerned. That's really weird. I don't know why it does that. Just doesn't want to cooperate. Anyway, getting off topic. I want you to understand though, if I ask you who your villain is and you say, well, the villain, please just do us all a favor and don't ever create anything again. But this helps you develop the identity of the villain. Now you can start with something simple and work your way up, such as, is he a war hero? Is he a ruler of some sort? Sometimes they are. Is he a total badass? Well, that would be nice. Is he very intelligent? Is he really, really intelligent, especially compared to everybody else he's working against? Add some more stuff. And from these 4 things, you can expand until you have someone like Count Dooku from Star Wars, who is all of these things. But at times, in the film, does not feel like the villain, Now, when carrying on this theme, it's important to realize that yes, some of these points are very broad. But I think that's the goal, that you're goal here is to make it, is to start out fairly broad and then slowly flesh out your creation so that it makes more sense over time. Alright, and then as you add to your villain, wow, these are really bad. They just don't blend in at all. That's slightly better. Alright. You can come up with a character that can be pretty interesting. But you need to remember that the character you have on paper, the one you spelled out, is not a story. The exercise of asking about your villain or any other character in your works is about background information. You build their personality off of this. This is used as a reference document throughout your creative work. Now, there are two types of characters, and this applies to villains. There are characters with arcs and characters without arcs. So what does this mean in layman terms? It means, does your character grow? Does she change? As in the case of the villain, does she start out bumbling and inept but grow in experience and confidence until she is a truly formidable opponent? Or does she stay the same? What are we doing here? This is what you show or tell in the game or creative work. Arcs are a part of your story, not your background. Don't confuse these things. Don't waste a lot of time creating arcs that are only heard or read. If you're going to take the time to write it, then put it on screen. And this is where it kind of breaks down a little bit. A lot of what you're going to do is a balancing act of trying to determine, is this something the player wants to see? Is it something they can just hear about? Or can we leave this out of the game entirely and it'll have no real lasting impact? So this is something to consider when you're creating content for your game. And trust me, every game and movie and TV show and book, well, most books, have reams of material that don't make it into the final cut, that eventually get cut out, okay? And that's the process that these people go through, right? In movies especially. People sometimes, I've run into people who believe that the 2 hours and 30 minutes that they see on screen is just, it must be 2 hours and 30 minutes that they turned the camera on, everything just freaking happened, and then they turned the camera off. 2 hours and 30 minutes of footage. No. You have thousands of hours of footage, alright? And then it goes to an editing team that spends months going through every ream, frame by frame, and they piece together a movie, okay? And this is when they add the soundtrack and all the other stuff that goes into a movie. Now, you can't make a low-budget movie where we start the camera rolling, people do stuff, turn the camera off, you're done, okay? That certainly happens. Are some of them really good movies? Yes. Because that's more of an exception than it is the actual rule. But my point is, there's always going to be stuff that gets cut out, okay? Always. Unless you're just lucky enough that you got something you're really happy with, and it doesn't feel like a bloated mess. So, again, you're always going to be balancing, between things you want to show, things you just want to tell about. Say your character in the game picks up a book and reads the book, and it's like, well, this is interesting. But it's not your character that's reading it, it's your audience. So do you feel like this would be more interesting being played out? Now, a very good tactic would be, say, if you've got, while you're developing a game, if you feel like you come up with an interesting character that might be fun in relation to that game, alright, but you're not sure if you want to create them yet, then sure, write a little story that the players can find in the game. It's like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. And as long as you've got a fairly open dialogue with your player base, then of course you can have them say, I think you should write this out, Well, then automatically, if you do a fairly decent job, you're going to have at least a couple people who are going to want to look into it, And it may be successful, it may not. I mean, you have to understand, every entertainment medium has a large chance of failure. Even with a good crowd base, even with a good established player base, even with a good established fan base, even if you already have an army of minions ready to come knocking down your door for your content, you still have the possibility of failure. So that's always something to consider when you're creating something. It's not always going to be successful, and that's unfortunate, but it's something you need to just go ahead and accept before you even start. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up for a lot of disappointment. And it's important, again, to understand that, because there's no guarantees, okay? But just as there's no guarantee that your product will be successful, there's no guarantee that it won't be successful, alright? So I feel like that is motivation to continue going, because there's that chance that somebody's going to like it. But what I've found in most cases is that desire is usually infectious, and if you're able to translate your desires very well, then that usually means that somebody's going to enjoy it as well. Okay? So I don't want to bum anybody out, with my naysayings and such. I want you to create things, because I'm not just a developer, I'm a gamer as well. I like playing video games, and I want to see that next video game. And part of the reason for this series is I'm tired of seeing dumb things. And well, by dumb, I mean I'm tired of seeing people do dumb things with really good games. Especially after a myriad of examples of why you shouldn't do certain things in a video game. But people still do it. They still do these relatively dumb things. And that's unfortunate. It really is. I don't really like how this stuff looks up here. I'm going to have to fix that. So bottom line is, do your best. Create something you're happy with, okay? And perhaps your audience will enjoy it too. You don't know. Alright? And you're going to know even less if you never create it. So, bite the bullet, take some time, put something together. And if you think studying videos like this is going to help you, then by all means, find something that works for you. It doesn't have to work for everybody else, because everybody else isn't the issue. It seems like this is just much harder than it really needs to be. Let's see. I don't think these are actually meant to look good. Well, that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, if you don't recognize this program, this is obviously RPG Maker. I use it for my videos. In case you didn't watch the first video, I highly recommend you watch it too, as it talks about heroes. But I use RPG Maker for these videos because the overall goal isn't to, say this engine is better than this engine, and this engine is better than this engine. That's not my goal. My goal here is showing that it doesn't really matter what you use to create your game. Alright? You should use something you're comfortable with. Alright? That being said, it's been a while since I used RPG Maker. So, it's kind of, but, you've got plenty of stuff out there. On Steam, you got 3D Copper Cube. And aside from that, you got Unity and Unreal, which are both free. You can pay for professional licenses on them, or you can use them for free. There's this RPG Maker. There's dozens of programs. There's dozens of programs like RPG Maker, which are specifically set up and designed to make these old school kind of looking RPGs, which is cool. That's what you're doing. If that is what you're doing. Okay, now you can set up Unity and Unreal to do that as well, obviously. But this is designed from the get-go to be that style of engine. Let's see here. This here is your character generator, and you can create fairly interesting characters with it. It's pretty detailed, but female, have little kids running around if you want to, or I guess it's more of a misnomer because these are more like tweens. Let's see here. Let's get out of that. There's something else though. Oh man, it's been a while since I did this. Okay, there we go. This is the event manager. I don't want to get too deep into this explanation because this is not actually the focus of these videos. Trying to remember how to edit these. Let's say import stuff. There we go. Okay, so this is where you create all the aspects of your game. So let me widen this. Well, I can't widen it now. Dang it. I lowered it down then. So this tab is all your actors. You can create new ones if you want to. There's some settings in here that allow you to adjust different things, but there's your actors. You can pre-create classes if you want to. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Change maximum. My advice is just go ahead and put 100 there. That way you don't have to keep messing with it. Okay. And so, alright, so you can create pretty much what you want. Okay, and you can adjust your experience curve if you really want to get into that. Just basically your most important thing is these end numbers right here. Basically that adjusts how much experience it takes for you to get to certain levels. Alright, and this is how you adjust the health value. Okay, so at level 1 you got 450 health. Alright. And at level 99 you got 5,350 health. This basically affects how you gain health over time. And conveniently, just really nice, you don't have to switch between each one. They're all right here on tabs. Pretty set up. Now, what can you do with this? Well, you can do a lot of stuff with this. So set your value for which level you want it to be. Now, one thing I will state is I don't like the fact that this is just a beginning and end. Alright? In a more dynamic game, you might say that, say you want older characters to slowly lose mana over time or slowly lose health. Okay? See how I just changed that? Now you're going to start out fairly level, and the idea here is that, see how this is level 6, this is level 1, and I think right about here, that's level 12. If you notice, between 1 and 10, you don't gain very much mana, okay? So the idea here is that you're going to gain other stats, but you're probably not going to get a lot of skills in this class. You know, that deal with mana anyway. But that's the idea. That's how all these things work. Alright. And this here, this part over here is where you tell them what type of weapon you're going to use. And as you can see, they've got quite a few in here. You know, and this is for that class. That's not for the character. Alright, you create an entire class with this. Alright, so, and again with the armor, you can set their basic parameters. You can add more parameters if you want. See? So if I want to, I can add another parameter here, but of course it's not wanting to let me. There we go. Okay. And then hit rate. Let's see. Critical rate. I think it would be nice if you could gain these over time. So like if you had an assassin class, eventually get to the point where you have like 180% crit rate. If you can hit the target. That looks pretty interesting. But, you know. So, no. I don't want to save changes to the database. But there's your idea. Those are your questions to consider for your villain. Alright? I wouldn't think about it too much. Now, in the Game Mastery Guide, because again, this series, I should keep mentioning this series is based off of tabletop role-playing game literature. Alright, and then the two ones I'm directly familiar with, which is Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. They both have, your core rule book. Dungeons and Dragons has the player's guide, the player's handbook, and a separate book, and I can't remember the name of it. Those are two basic books you have to have. Alright, but they have a game mastery guide, and then they have like a monster handbook or something like that. Pathfinder, which I have a lot more experience in, has the core rule book, which has all the basic elements that you need to create a game, and then you have your bestiaries, which have all your monsters in them. They give you a good idea of how to. They give you some monsters to use and tell you how to create monsters, which is pretty interesting. When you get into your game mastery guide, though, it breaks down the elements of creating a game and gives you some stuff to work with. And there's a whole chapter on creating a character. And this chapter is not limited to the main character or the villain or anybody else. Okay? So the idea is, it even gives you randomized charts. So this is more into helping develop your villain's personality. Once you've asked those basic questions and given an answer to them, you can take some of the rolling charts, which is pretty cool, and randomize this guy. Okay, so because let's say this isn't really the main villain, this is more of a underling, but he's still pretty competent. But there's only so many, Agent Smiths you want running around. Alright? There's only so many Saurons you want running around. Those are your ultimate villains, But then again, there's only so many Sarumans you want running around. There's only so many Wormtails you want running around, Eventually, if all your villains look the same, your game is going to feel really damn generic. Okay? So, these little charts that allow you to roll dice, a d20 set usually, on different aspects of your character, like their name, their personality type, what are their likes and their dislikes and stuff. And this gives you little elements to kind of work into their stories to kind of make them feel like an actual character. Okay? Now, if you're creating a game kind of like, Street Fighter, where everybody's a muscle-bound idiot that basically likes lifting weights, and don't misperceive that as I don't like Street Fighter. I'm just using this as an example. Everybody lifts weights, everybody practices martial arts, and their form of fighting is standing head to head and punching each other in the face. If that's your style of game, that's fine. Then you can work with things like that. Now, the interesting thing is, when you throw in the occasional really intelligent villain, well, it completely changes the gameplay. Alright, but anyway, so you use these roll charts, you can create these different elements, and so now you got a leather-wearing, fluffy scarf-wearing villain who may seem homosexual at the beginning. Is that important? No, not really, but it can add an extra element of who is this person right here. Immediately noticeable, very flamboyant. And you find out, even though he has this little flippant, very weird character, he kind of has this whole John Wick feel, or a better example, Mr. Nobody, if you watched that movie. I really liked that villain because, as he's blatantly spelled out, which Mr. Nobody and John Wick, there's nothing subtle about those movies, so they don't really go to a lot of effort to be subtle about any of their descriptions or portrayals of anybody. The villain in Mr. Nobody is extremely intelligent. He's very powerful, and he's a psychopath. Very interesting. Alright, I mean, he even straight up stabs a random dude and kills him in his club in front of hundreds of witnesses. And nobody cares. I mean, he's just basically a one-off. He's there to be killed. But the point is establishing your villain. This guy is kind of weird. He's not your standard villainy type, okay? Which just makes him an oddity. But as a character, it makes him fairly interesting. I'm not going to go into detail of the overall interesting of him compared to other villains, but you get the point, okay? And if you haven't watched Mr. Nobody, I highly recommend it. It's pretty interesting because he makes a fairly interesting character too. But we're not discussing heroes in this video. So anyway, now that I've wasted your time watching me fumble around with RPG Maker for a while, I hope you find this video useful. I hope you find it interesting. I want all of you to create really good content. If you haven't seen the first video, please definitely check it out. Who is your hero? And if you like my content, like and subscribe. I don't expect anybody to send me money, but if you want to make donations, I do have a Patreon. The link is in the description. Other than that, I hope all you have a very nice day, and I hope to see you all again sometime, whenever.